Hello, everybody. Welcome to Two Bi Guys. We'll get right to it in just a minute. Today, we have a really cool interview with an author named Wayne Scott. He is a married bi guy with a story similar to some of the guys from my book, but he wasn't in my book because he wrote his own book, and it's very good. So you'll hear a little bit about his story in a moment. I just wanted to pop in here and announce that I am resuming group coaching beginning this Sunday, March 2nd at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. These sessions will be donation-based, pay what you wish. It's free to sign up. There's going to be a link in the show notes and also in our bio for Two Bi Guys. And I'm going to change up the format of it. It's going to be shorter sessions. We used to go 2 hours or more. Now it's just going to be 75 minutes. Everyone will have time to share and talk about what's going on for them and what brought them to group coaching. Then we'll do one or maybe two coaching demos where I'll coach someone in front of the rest of the group. There's a lot of value in being coached in front of a group. There's also a lot of value in seeing someone else be coached. You learn a lot about what you're going through by seeing someone else process in real time what they're going through. For now, I'm going to do these every other Sunday. So it'll be March 2nd, March 16th, March 30th. If there's enough interest, maybe we'll add another day, maybe during the week, a weeknight. And if you want bonus content from Two Bi Guys, there is bonus content with Wayne from this interview. Check out patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. And now, without further ado, here is my interview with Wayne Scott. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Two Bi Guys. I'm very excited for this episode today. It's a topic related to my book and the series last season by Men Married to Women, another author and writer. My guest today is a writer, psychotherapist, and teacher in Portland, Oregon. His writing has appeared in The Sun, in Poets and Writers, The Psychotherapy Networker, Huffington Post, among many others. And his 2020 New York Times essay titled Two Open Marriages in One Small Room was adapted for the Modern Love podcast in 2021 and then adapted for Modern Love Amsterdam, the TV series, in 2022. And his new book, The Maps They Gave Us, is a memoir that tells the story of a man and woman who fall in love again on their way to getting a divorce, which we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Two Bi Guys, Wayne Scott. Hi.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Robert.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm glad we kind of connected randomly, but it turns out we have some much in common. And I just joined this How group and I saw you have been in there for a while.
Yeah, since about 2007, I've kind of come and gone from the Husbands Out to Their Wives group, partly because of the volume. It's a pretty significant volume of kind of back and forth through different members. It's a very lively group, and so I've come and gone over the years. But
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone to their conferences. I've probably gone to 3 or 4 of their conferences, which are wild. If you have never gone to them, they are just to be in a room. Like they're full. I mean, they're just packed with
Wow.
all men who are bi queer, gay men married to women out to their
Wow.
wives. Yeah,
Wow. Cool. I actually am trying to go to the next conference and maybe do some kind of workshop or something, but I want to go, and just getting in that group and seeing how many messages get posted every day. I mean, it's so
yeah,
active. It just really confirms my suspicions that this is a very, very common but hidden experience.
exactly. Good way of putting it. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't like I haven't read your whole book, I will admit. I read the first few chapters and I'm eager to read more. It's wonderful. It's like I'm fascinated by the topic obviously, and there's a lot of interesting details that don't always come up. So I want to get into that, but I guess just start by telling me like why did you want to write this book?
yeah. So it's a good question. So I actually never saw myself as someone who wrote books. I wrote short essays, personal essays, reviews, things like that. I had little kids, like so. You don't have much time, and so mostly I could do is eke out little short essays. But over time, as my spouse and I were doing this experiment of moving from kind of conventionally monogamous couple to non-monogamous, we kept having these interesting experiences, and I would write an essay about them. And when I strung all the essays together and I looked at them as a whole, I realized, okay, number one, I have the makings of a book if I just fill in a few cracks here and there. But the other thing that really struck me is that even though this was a story of two people, for most of the memoir, the couple think they're getting divorced. It's one of
Mhm.
those miserable periods between when people decide they're getting divorced and then when they actually figure out, like, are we actually going to jump off this cliff and do it, or are we going to do something else? Um, During that whole period, where I thought we were divorcing, it actually looked a lot more like a love story,
Hmm.
of
Wow.
two characters who were kind of rediscovering their love for each other, and maybe in many ways a different kind of love, a deeper, more compassionate understanding of where each of us were coming from at that stage in our lives,
Yeah.
right? And I think,
Uh-huh.
it's interesting. Even though we're a mixed orientation couple, I don't think it's so different from a lot of other marriages, straight marriages, marriages between men, or marriages between women, in that sometimes you lose a part of yourself. Like, you can
Yeah.
feel lost, and in the demands of marriage and raising kids and having a house and a mortgage and all that stuff, you kind of forget who you were, and that definitely like
Yeah.
happened for me.
Yeah.
Like at about year 14, um, I'd had a bit of a crisis, and I realized that I had forgotten myself,
Wow.
and I was lonely, and I was kind of desperate. And the very saddest part of that was that I couldn't figure out a way to talk about it with my spouse without it seeming like I was asking for a divorce. Because obviously, when you talk about the fact that I can't not have some kind of relationship with other men, you're breaking your vows. You're like, we had
Yeah.
we had signed up for very conventional. The vows that's the maps they gave us. They gave it when you sign up and you get married. They ask you to make a vow of fidelity. We were told very specifically we had to do it. Um, and so I didn't know how to talk about the crisis I was having to her, um, because I thought I would be, even by saying something, I would be breaking my vows and we would have to get divorced. And I didn't want to get divorced. I was confused. I was like, I wanted to be with her, but I also wanted to be true to myself. And like, how do I fit that in this
Wow.
heteronormative container?
Right. Wow. I already have so many things to say and we haven't even started talking about the story itself. But it's a really interesting way that you framed it of like losing something about yourself that you have to re-find and also then connect with your partner. And I agree completely that that is like such a common thing, even outside of the queer bi stuff. Like
Exactly.
that maybe happens to everyone. And that causes so much tension among partners when you can't find yourself or you're losing yourself and you
Yeah.
have to do that. Yeah.
And the losing, it's so gradual and so insidious. You almost don't see it happening. Because like, the weird thing about our relationship is that we knew who we were when we signed up. When we got together,
Yeah.
I identified as bisexual. She knew that. She identified as a feminist straight woman. We knew who each other were, right? And we actually never really intended, for the first 5 years we were together, we didn't think we were going to get married. It wasn't in the cards. It wasn't something that we cared about, right?
Mm.
But and so after, but we did get married for various reasons I could describe or not. We did get married, then we had kids, then we moved a couple times, and over the years, I didn't know how to work it into the conversation about being bi, especially as a man in a monogamous relationship. Like, why would I be telling people
Right.
this part of myself? Like, other than, for me, there were really deep cultural, historical, personal reasons that I identified with the queer experience. Being a boy who grew up being bullied like forever, not fitting into a certain gender stereotype, and feeling the kind of outsiderhood that comes with that. So there
Yeah.
were lots of ways in which I missed my queer friends. I
Yeah.
missed having a more solid belonging in the queer community. But when you're very straight passing, you're heterosexually married, and you have three little kids, you're not really in that world anymore. There's not
Yeah.
a lot of time to be in that world. And so over
Right.
time, I stopped mentioning to people that that had been a part of who I was. Now, maybe they read essays I wrote, or maybe they, saw other things, but it didn't come up in conversation anymore. I was struggling to figure out, well, why am I telling people this anymore, since I'm in this particular container. So I lost,
Right.
yeah, I lost track of myself.
That makes so much sense, and especially when it comes to bisexuality, which is so easy to become hidden, especially in a straight passing relationship. like I'm now working as a coach and working with not all, but mostly people in a similar situation who are bi men married to women and working something out with their wives, whether it's opening things up or just finding themselves and finding ways to express their queerness or bisexuality within a monogamous marriage. And that's often the hardest part is like, even if you're on the same page about opening up or not, it's like, how do you find these other ways to express this? How do you
Exactly.
stay connected to the queer community and have queer friends? And something that you said is something that a lot of my clients talk about and struggle with, which is like, it's hard to even talk about these things without it seeming like something else is going on. It's hard to
Exactly.
say I'm unhappy with the current situation without it seeming like I want a divorce. Or it's hard to talk about my attractions without it seeming like I want to go have sex with someone else.
Right.
So that
I mean,
how do
I
you
really
navigate that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I think recognizing the stranglehold that we're in as a culture and that it's a marriage divorce binary, and there's not a lot of room in between. There's not a lot of room to
Yeah.
think about marriage as an improvisational, creative, adaptive experiment that is unique to two individuals, right? That they are
Yeah.
the ones who are creating it. That's not the message we get when we get
Mhm.
married. I mean, when you think about like one of the shocking things for me when we did decide to get married at a certain point at 5 years in, and as we're going through the planning, right, we of course went into the saying we're not going to, it's going to be small, really tiny. We're just doing it to get the certificate, but it became bigger like it does with all couples. It became bigger and people kept piling on different prescriptions and recommendations about which conventions we had to follow. The bride had to carry a bouquet. There had to be groomsmen. There had to be a maid of honor, and all this
Uh-huh.
kind of stuff. And it just gets kind of like how it looks is very predetermined. And it doesn't actually feel, in many ways, it doesn't actually feel like it looks like you anymore. At least that was our experience with it as people who didn't really plan on getting married. We got married largely because we were getting ready to move cross country as an unmarried couple. And my spouse came from, her father was a first generation German American, very traditional in his worldview. And he was not going to feel comfortable with his daughter with going off unmarried with this guy who in fact was just going to go to graduate school. So she's going to just go off and move across the country unmarried with this guy who won't even have a job. That
Uh-huh.
was not, he
Uh-huh.
was not going to sign
Yeah.
up for that. So we had to toss him a bone. We decided, we're going to get married. We're going to get it as a way of communicating the strength of our bond in language and terms and conventions that'll be understandable to her dad, her grandmother, other people in our family who wouldn't understand otherwise.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, that it makes sense to me too that like even if you go in thinking like we're getting married for this and this reason, like once you're married, it just like people see it a certain way, you start to think about it a certain way even if you
Right.
don't want to,
Right.
like just like that word and all the other words that come with it,
It's an
that
it's an
it
unrelenting fight because I remember
yeah.
like when we first got married, the first couple of years we were married, we refused to say husband and wife. We kept saying
Yeah.
partner, right? But people
Yeah.
kept saying your
Same.
wife, your husband. They keep like you just like it was like we were being kind of pounded down with people saying no, it's a wife, no, it's a husband. And I was like, okay, who gives a shit? It's husband and wife.
Right. I identify with that very much because like my wife and I sort of got married at pretty quickly for specific reasons of like safety and we wanted to not get split up by the politics of the world. And
Yeah,
so I was very like, wanting to do it and we like it made sense that we were doing it, but I kept saying in my head like this isn't a traditional marriage. I would tell
yeah,
people this isn't what you think of as marriage. Like it's this and we're writing our own rules but we're doing the legal marriage thing for specific reasons and here's the difference and like I'm explaining it to people and I try to hold that in my head but it's difficult because you the constant explaining like yeah you can want to create your own thing and do it but there's constant pressure
yeah. A
to do
barrage
it
of cultural expectations, right?
yeah yeah
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, okay, I want to get into this story. I'm sure stuff will come up as we go. But I love where you started the book. You kind of jumped into the most dramatic moment, and I think that that's it's a really important moment for many people, and I've coached and talked to people who have been in that situation, and it can go different directions.
Yeah.
You started with when you went to see either mediator or couples counselor, and you weren't sure which, if you were getting a divorce or not. It actually, reading it, really feels like you are getting a divorce.
Yeah.
That's
No,
how it reads.
when we started down the path, my spouse was very clear that we were getting a divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. It's a spoiler to me, and I'm shocked that that you didn't, having only read a few chapters. So I'm really curious to see the transformation. But first, tell us, what was that moment like? Like, how did it all come to a head suddenly after 14 years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it requires me to kind of talk about behaviors that I'm not proud of. So I mentioned to you that I knew that I was struggling and I was lonely and I'm desperate and I had really felt like I had lost touch with the queer part of myself, that part of my identity, and that it was and that it couldn't be satisfied just by reading books by queer authors or all the different
Mm,
cultural ways in which I tried to keep it alive. That just it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough,
yeah.
and I didn't know how to talk about it with my spouse without it seeming like I was asking for a divorce. Like it was just that's how constrained this heteronormative container felt to me, and so it ended up being a crisis. Actually, I was reaching out to try to connect with men through the internet. My spouse and I share email access to each other's email accounts. She needed to look something up in my sent email box, and she found me reaching out. Right, so that was the moment of crisis, the night of crisis, and that was when it clarified for her this doesn't work. I went out, um, and we actually physically separated that night.
Mm,
Like the night that she found out, she just said, "You really just need to get out of here."
mm,
And so she just felt very, understandably, she felt very, very deeply betrayed. And
mhm,
so I moved out, and then there was this whole stormy crucible period where we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. But she was always pretty intense. She was going to get divorced. But interestingly, the professional that we went to see for divorce mediation, she also did couples counseling. And one of the interesting things in the memoir is that divorce mediation costs $220 an hour. This is in 2007. Couples counseling, it's cheaper to stay married. Couples counseling only costs $150 an hour. And so it was this ongoing thing with this professional we saw that we never actually clarified what we were doing. She never
mm.
asked us. We never insisted because we didn't want to pay the higher price.
Right,
We didn't
right.
want to have the conversation, partly because we didn't want to we talk about money, but also partly because we didn't. It was helpful to stay as unbearable it was helpful to stay in a liminal period and to just have time to sort it out and try to figure out what really did we want to do. The fascinating thing about it is even though we saw this professional Lene for a year, she never charged us.
Oh, wow. I didn't get up to that in the book. I was
Yeah.
going to ask, which rate did she end up charging you?
No, she for well, and I won't give a spoiler about why she didn't charge us. It was a mystery to us, and we kept saying after every session, we were like, "Should we be paying her? Should we ask
Huh.
this question?" But the thing is, the only way to offer to pay her was to commit to divorce or couples counseling, and we weren't ready
Interesting.
to. We wanted to stay in this in between place. I
Wow.
think there was part of us that wanted to stay in this in between place for a really long time because it's a really big decision and in
Yeah.
some ways, it also allowed us not to participate in this cultural imperative that if you have a marriage that's struggling, you need to get divorced. Like people
Yeah.
judge you if you're staying in a marriage that doesn't look like it's where you're struggling, where you're not happy or you're not in agreement. We rush people to divorce very quickly, um,
Yeah.
and also to
Interesting.
sort of thinking that what they were heading towards is a failure, and it's not fair to talk about divorce as a failure, as something that's worthy of shame, because it's just another transition.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Right.
So
Right. That makes sense to me. Like, we often look at these relationship things as a binary thing, including does a relationship end or continue as like the only options, but it's so many different forms that things can take. Even when divorce happens, relationships often don't end, they just transform. And when relationships continue and you don't get a divorce, they often shift and change, and
Yeah,
it's different. And so it's interesting that it's almost like a metaphor of sexuality and gender, of like, you didn't want to put a label on what you were
yeah,
doing yet. You wanted
yeah,
to just feel it out and actually explore it without committing to one of the two extremes
yeah,
yet. And then by doing that, you found your path forward that worked
yeah.
for you two.
Yeah, I mean, we live in this time period. It's kind of an exciting time period, and people are really looking at culturally. We're really looking at the ways in which we are controlled by these binaries that are handed
Yeah.
to us, whether it's male, female, right, or gay, straight, or married, divorced. And
Yeah.
it's not, the world is not as clearly either or as that. There's this huge continuum of gradations, and sometimes it takes a long time to figure them out, to figure
Yeah.
out where you land and how you want to explain and articulate who you are, and yeah, and who you are.
Right. Right. Yeah, makes perfect sense. I also, there was a quote in that first chapter that I just think is resonated so much, and from what I know of like friends of mine and people I've worked with and other by people, like, you're talking about how like that the queerness can kind of fade away if you're in a straight passing marriage, or if other people don't know. You were writing about a friend named Grace, I think that's a friend.
That's my mom.
Oh, that's your mom. Oh, whoops, I missed it. Okay, but you realize, like, Grace could only reflect the whole of me by leaning on ironies and implied meanings that not everyone in the room grasped. This was the beginning of a kind of compartmentalization that protected Ava and me from judgment in the various worlds we frequented around people we loved, who we presumed would never understand our unique bond. It
Yeah,
would get more rigid as the years passed. And like, I want to ask you about that, but I just think it makes it. I've been in that situation where
yeah,
I'm like in a room where I know something about someone, but they're not ready to share it, and you
yes,
kind of tiptoe around it, and you both know what you're talking about but no one else does. And I've been on the other side of that too before I was out, where I wanted people to know but I
yeah.
couldn't talk about it. So tell me about that feeling.
Yeah, well, I was nervous the night before we were getting married. I already had this foreboding sense that I was going to be losing a part of myself, and I knew that coming to the wedding ceremony, that we didn't call it a wedding, we called it a covenant ceremony. We wouldn't use any of the words. We didn't call me a groom, we didn't call her a bride, we didn't call it a wedding. We were trying. But I knew that, at the wedding there were not only going to be more traditional people like our parents and aunts and uncles and stuff like that, but her feminist friends would be there who had their own opinions about heterosexual marriage. A lot of my queer community was going to be there. A lot of my ex-boyfriends were going to be there. And so I was having this conversation with my mom the night before. She was going to do a toast at the reception. And I said, Mom, this is Grace. Mom, is there any way you can out me a little bit at this in your toast? Like, sort of make it clear that I still know who I am. We still know who I am, but not so much that
Right.
my father-in-law will figure it out, because I was afraid of my father-in-law. He had a temper, and I really thought if he knew this, there's no way he's going to let us get married. And so that's
Hmm.
the beginning of the end, really, in a lot of ways. Like, and so my mom came up with this really funny toast, which was like really steeped in a lot of ironies. A lot of coded references to me being kind of a unique and special boy who liked to embroider. Her special little boy. And she never thought I was going to get married. And of course, when she says that, all these gay guys are like, "Wah!" in the
Right.
in the background. Um,
Right.
and but I mean, and so it's funny on one level, right? But actually, it's also sad on another level, because already looking at the ways in which irony and compartmentalization, that we were going to lean on those as strategies for safety, but also to our detriment ultimately. And one of the
Right.
things that happens later, if you do get a chance to read the book, one of the things that evolves is, I start to sort of like read all these queer authors from days gone by, our ancestors, Walt Whitman, D.H. Lawrence, E.M. Forster, James Baldwin, all talking about the ways that queer men find each other through these kind of coded ways, these coded mechanisms of survival that
Mhm.
allowed their connections to happen during times when, and most of, for all the authors I just recommended, you could end up in jail. You
Yeah.
could end up in jail for being queer. So there's a long history for queer men and women of communicating through irony and code, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it's really rich, and it's part of our survival. And there's also a way in which it's really sad, right?
Yeah.
It's really sad.
Right.
So, just kind of like those are also some of the maps they gave us, right? Are what our queer and feminist ancestors, the ways in which they've lighted the path for us to do things in a different way. I didn't
Mhm.
originate the idea of non monogamy or open marriage, right? People were talking about non monogamy early, like for centuries they've talked about it. It's not a new topic at all, but but even though it's been talked about, it's always been a little taboo. And it also touches this nerve of like cultural reactivity
Yeah.
when you talk about it.
And it shows how hard it is to change the culture. Like if it's been in out there from those people you mentioned for this long and it's still taking this long to be normalized. Like there's a lot of movement lately, but it's hard to change that. And it's
Yeah.
a decade, you have to really change it over generations.
Yeah, it takes so much time, and it takes people talking about it. Like like
Yeah.
about a year before my memoir came out, Molly Roden Winter wrote a memoir called More: Memoir of an Open Marriage, which is a great read about a heterosexual couple that decide to open up their marriage and all the complexity that introduces into their arrangement. And so I really this book did quite well, got a lot of attention, but it also got a lot of judgment. Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm watching what she's up against, people being really kind of mean about what she was doing. There's so many judgments we have about women who choose to have any kind of a intimate relationship other than their husband. And she got all of that piled on in the
Wow. Yeah.
aftermath of her memoir. So, we do these things sometimes at our peril.
Yeah, yeah. Well, kudos to you for sharing this story and being part of the movement. And I also think it's interesting what you said about like that moment at the giving your mom giving the toast was like what you wanted to happen in that moment, but it was also sort of the beginning of the end. I think you said it's like was the beginning of the unraveling that would happen later. Because like that, it just makes so much sense that it's like it it's can feel easier to compartmentalize and it often is safer. And so many people sort of just fall into that and then but then actually even though it feels easier in each moment, like over time it accumulates and it builds up and it's psychically difficult. And I'm working with guys who have said exactly that. Like it's sometimes it just feels easier to be in the closet, but they know on some level that they can't handle that actually, that they have to do something. But that compartmentalization is so common. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's we don't realize the power and the impact we have when we choose to be authentic and honest about who we are, especially in a world that's hostile towards who we are. And one
Yeah.
of the most moving indirect benefits of us being open with our children is when my daughter, decided to come out when she was 12, and she came out to
Yeah.
me while we were on a walk in the forest. And it was like just turning a switch. She just said, "Hey dad, just FYI, so I think I'm queer. It's kind of hard to tell you, but I just wanted you to know." And it was really, I think it was relatively easy and seamless for her. And largely it was because she had a built-in ally in her family,
Yeah.
and I didn't have that growing up at all. I didn't know I didn't have any relatives who were queer. Um,
Yeah.
and
Same.
yeah, yeah. And so like I didn't realize it. Like I was actually gonna make the path. I hope I was gonna make the path easier for her. And for my other two kids are very straight identified. Um, but yeah, we don't know
Yeah.
who's going to benefit by our own
Right.
honesty.
Right. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful reflection because yeah, it's like sometimes you kind of people know they gotta make a change and they want to be more authentic and open, but they don't exactly know like where that'll lead or what that will get them. And pretty much universally in my experience, once people do that, they find these surprising benefits or like moments or connections with people that they didn't see coming, and they like that just are so worth it, that if they had seen it coming, they would have done this a lot sooner. Like
Yeah.
so much joy and connection. But it's surprising. And, you often don't think about those positives in the moments that are really tense and difficult. Like, I want to get to your story more too, but just like what has been, I mean, that's a beautiful one there, but what else have been the benefits of like being your authentic self after you kind of went through this process?
I think the biggest thing I would say is how curious so many people are about all the different ways we can be unconventionally married, and not just non-monogamy, but
Hmm.
actually frequently non-monogamy. I mean, because when I had this essay happen, it appeared in Modern Love in 2020. Modern Love, you get a lot of attention when something ends up in there. And after that appeared, both myself and my spouse had various friends, neighbors, people in our lives who reached out to us and said, "Hey, could we get together for coffee? Could we like have a little chat?" And it
Yeah.
was all people wanting to have a kind of private, kind of like careful conversation about, how did you do this? And is
Yeah.
this something that I could do for myself, or that I could sort of adapt as something that I need to do to help my marriage, be more fulfilling for me?
Yeah.
Because like when people stay married for a really long time, it's really easy to get into a very stuck groove with each other, and for there not to be a lot of room for growth and movement and um, excitement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I want to come back to that question in a minute. Like, how did you do this? Because that's sort of the key that I think everyone will want to hear. But before we get there, your story is kind of unique. In I didn't have many stories like this in my book, unfortunately, just because it's hard to fit everything in. But many bi guys suppress it until a lot later in life.
Right.
And your story is a little different in that you knew from a younger age you were not straight,
Yeah.
and had experiences before you met your wife. So, and also it was interesting that it was like in the 80s when when during the AIDS crisis, and that was part of your development and identity. So tell me about that. Like, how did you understand your sexuality growing up, and then how did that lead to like when you met your wife, like leading up to that? How did
Yeah.
all that play out for you?
Well, one of the heroes of the memoir is my mom, Grace. And one of the reasons she's a hero is because she had three boys, and one of the three boys kind of stuck out like a sore thumb as kind of a misfit, as a sort of a gender atypical young man who preferred to play with girls, cried inconsolably when he was signed up for Little League, and was constantly getting pounded on by other boys when he went to elementary and especially middle school. And so, my mom, and at that era, this was like the 70s, so I'm outing myself for how old I am. In the 70s, boys were told pretty consistently that if you're bullied, you have to fight back. You got
Hmm.
to find your inner courage, and you got to get violent. And that was just like not an option for me. I was like, that is not who I am. And so my mom would just keep me home from school. Like I would stay home from school for weeks sometimes,
uh,
because that was the safer option.
huh.
So we looked at one afternoon when we were staying home from school. This is the 70s. Phil Donahue was really big. We would watch Phil Donahue, mother and son, together in the afternoon. It's a very gay guy thing to do with your mom, watching Phil Donahue together. And there was this one show about teenagers who were homeless because their parents kicked them out of the house for being queer, right? And in those
Uh-huh.
days of commercial television, there'd be these long commercial breaks. And during one of the commercial breaks, my mom turned to me and she's like, I don't know what your situation is, but if you ever thought that you were gay, that would never happen to you. You are never
Mm.
getting kicked
Oh.
out of this house. I know. I know.
Oh.
And and I got all bristly and defensive in the moment, like, Mom, you don't know who I am.
Uh,
But I mean, I think actually I even said something like, I think I'm interested in men and women. I think that's what I said at the time.
yeah.
I would have been 13 or 14, and we just left it at that point. But we kind of laid the path that if I was going to come out as anything, that she was going to be okay with me. And if you have one parent who's got your back, you're going to be, I think you're going to, it makes everything easier.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So
Wow.
yeah, and so when I did actually come out to her when I was 19, I had a boyfriend, the first serious boyfriend that I had. And when I told her, she was totally cool with it. She, as in a lot of families, alert parents can see it coming, right?
Yeah.
They have started to put the pieces together when they notice their kids' kind of behaviors and attractions and stuff like that. And so it was pretty seamless and easy, but it was also complicated because again, at that era, this is now mid '80s. AIDS is huge, right? Bisexual is a dirty word. It is
Right.
not. It is just not a word that people think are valid. People see you as the bridge between the gay community, which is like all sick with AIDS, and the straight community, which is not, sort of not at that time. At least that was the fiction we had.
Right.
And so there's just like a lot of stigma to saying that you were bisexual. And so I really just kind of like floundered around. Some people thought I was kind of straightish. Some people thought I was gay, and I secretly would tell people, I think I really am bisexual. I think I really have an interest in both. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it was easier just to have people think you were gay. I went to a pretty accepting college where there was a very strong faculty gay presence, so we felt very supported in being different. So in some ways, it was easier just to say you were gay.
Right. I actually highlighted something you wrote in that chapter. To say one slept with women and men was to give ammunition to a prejudiced world. And it comes in a section talking about AIDS and what you're saying, like bi men were the bridge. And so yeah, that makes sense that it would just be easier to identify as gay. That
Yeah,
which you still hear today, gay or straight, that's often easier for people than bi.
at that age, this is like in my late teens, early 20s in college, it was very, very hard to say you were bisexual to young men who were being like disowned by their families for being gay, to say you were bisexual and to have there be an image in the world of it looking like there were gay men who could change to straight.
Yeah.
Like, was to betray one's friends, right? There was
Yeah.
no way around it. It was
Mm,
so painful for so many people who were being disowned and pressured by their families. And
right.
yeah, what friendship can be built on betrayal?
That's interesting. Like, it's understandable that gay men would feel that way. That makes sense. And then it's also understandable that straight women would be fearful of their own safety. And
Yeah,
yet that leaves bi men in this position in the middle where like they haven't done anything wrong. They're literally we're being ourselves
yeah,
and acknowledging fluidity or bisexuality. And yet, just because of what was going on in the world,
hmm,
that triggered other people, and then bi men feel like they have to hide it and they can't share who they are. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
interesting. So tell me about then meeting your wife and where you were at that time and what you guys talked about and how your
yeah.
relationship developed.
We met through in a common friendship circle when we were in college. We were very very progressive school. We both took the same class on feminist theory and practice, right? So that was like an early bonding thing. We were both really interested in thinking about gender and sexuality as a construction.
Hmm.
Um, and then the year after um, college, I just happened to run into her. She was becoming very good friends with the woman who was my roommate, platonic roommate, and so we just were like in much more close proximity with each other. And I just really fell for her. I didn't understand it at the time. It was really powerful. It was really visceral. Like I'm a
Hmm.
wordy guy. I'm a chatty guy. I like to put words to everything to help me figure it out. And when I was around my spouse in the early days when she first kind of showed up in my apartment, I felt like I was walloped,
Huh.
um, like
Huh.
like physically, like I would have to go over to another room and like, what the hell is going on in my body? Like I just
Huh.
really hard. I can't look at this woman. I can't make eye contact with this woman without feeling extremely anxious. Um,
Interesting.
and I didn't know what the feelings were, but I actually did start to piece together. Okay, wait a minute. I think there's some kind of attraction actually going here. It's just actually really intense, and I'm actually not used to it in a lot of ways. Like it was easier for
Huh.
me to have relationship with men, like romantic relationship with men, than it was with women because of a lot of the stuff I kind of the baggage that I inherited from my dad and the ways in which he expressed his heterosexuality. Um, but but yeah,
Interesting.
something really powerful happened with my spouse, and I just really wanted to be with her. I just
Interesting.
wanted to be.
I not to boil everything down to gender because this it probably is just due to the unique person. But at the time, like how did that feeling compare to relationships you had been in with men?
Um, how did it compare? I think the biggest difference probably was, um, so this is the AIDS pandemic period, right? So it's a really tense time. Um, with all of the boyfriends that I had up to that point, we had never been monogamous. Monogamy was never even something we talked about, right?
Uh-huh.
And it kind of set us up to have some problems. And that
Mm.
at one point, I think it was in 1987, I had a really serious HIV scare. I found out that one of my ex boyfriends had probably had AIDS, and so it was a miserable time. In that time, to try to figure out your test results was really laborious and difficult. You had to go to an anonymous testing site because it couldn't be part of your health insurance. It couldn't be widely known. And then you had to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get the results. Right.
Mhm.
And so during this period, I was like, you know what? I don't think I want this non-monogamy or this like having sex with anyone kind of stuff, even though you have a boyfriend. This feels scary. This feels dangerous. And when my wife and I got together and we were dating, we hadn't been dating for more than maybe a month before she said, "Hey, if we're going to be physically intimate with each other, you have to be monogamous."
Mm.
And for me, that was like this new concept. I was like, "What? What is this magical thing, monogamy you're talking about? You mean we would just be in this safe little cocoon together and nobody would have to worry about possibly getting sick or anything like that?" So I actually, at the time, I heard it as this very kind of protective thing that she was offering.
Uh-huh.
Like I had just had this really scary time where I really did think I was going to die,
Yeah.
um, and and it's really just through the grace of God that somehow I was not HIV positive, and so she was offering me a kind of protection, and it felt very much like a kind of love too,
Mm.
and something that nobody else had offered to me at that up to that point. So that was really powerful for me. And then I think too, because, and it's in the memoir that like I had a very conflicted relationship with my dad, and the dynamics of the relationship with him seemed to spill over into all my relationships with boyfriends. I was always disappointed with them. I always
Mm.
felt kind of rejected by them and things like that. And so the pathway, the emotional romantic pathway with men had never felt easy for me.
Interesting. Wow. So then you got together, you got married, and then it's 14 years before the couples counseling begins. Is that
Well,
about right?
we're both social workers. We both got graduate degrees in social work, so we're like
Uh,
really into going to therapy, like a
oh,
lot.
okay.
And so we had many experiences in doing couples work before. But yeah, when we had the crisis,
Yeah.
um, we went to this professional who was both a divorce mediator and a couples counselor.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah,
Okay. So I mean, we're skipping a lot because we don't have enough time. Everyone should read the book and hear everything. But tell us, like, what happened next? It seems like you're going to get a divorce. That's sort of ostensibly why you're there, although you haven't defined that. What, how did that shift things? Like, what changed next?
yeah. This divorce mediator slash couples counselor. The first thing she said to us, she said, "This is the first meeting." She said, if you're going to get divorced, you really need to have the first thing you need to have is you need to have a common story. You need to
Mm.
have some shared narrative that you both feel comfortable enough with that can be the basis of what you say to your family and your friends and your neighbors and your kids, right? Because a lot of times what happens when people are divorcing is they have these very polarized adversarial narratives about what happened in their marriage, and that is such a recipe for disaster for everybody. And
Mm.
so she gave us this challenge. She said, you have to come up with your common story. And of course, I'm a writer, right? Also, so I'm always thinking about, well, what makes a good story, right?
Uh-huh.
And these two questions, like what makes a good story and what makes a good marriage, became interestingly kind of intertwined throughout the
Mm.
memoir, the period of the memoir. And I'm thinking about, how do we tell the story of who we are? And as part of the couples work we did, a big part of couples work is listening to each other's story, listening without defensiveness or reactivity. So like I
Yeah.
really had to like put my ego aside, put my own feelings aside and really listen to my spouse and listen to her. What was her experience being married to this queer guy who was struggling with his identity? Because there's
Mm.
really her experience of the marriage was really different from mine. And I had to kind of put my experience aside to be able to listen and truly deeply understand what it had been like for her. She felt betrayed, and I really needed to get that.
Yeah.
Um, and that's hard, I think, when you're feeling like, hey, I'm sad and lonely too. This didn't work for me. But who gives a shit? You have to put that aside for a minute. There'll be time for you. You'll get listened to eventually. But right now, you need to really figure out a way to be more attuned to what you've put this person through. And
Interesting.
and so it was through the process of listening more closely and deeply to our separate experiences in this marriage that we were able to get to a different place. We were able to see each other as characters in a story in a deeper way,
Huh.
right? Right?
That's so interesting because, like, I've heard that before. Like, we need to be telling the same story about our relationship, or at least be on the same page. But often I hear that as like, if we want this marriage to work, that's what we need to do. So it's interesting that this person was like, even if you're getting a divorce, you still need to come up with the common story. But then it's like the same process, and then it led to reconnecting. I'm just curious, like how, because so many people I know and work with, they feel like they're at an impasse, right? Like I want this, she doesn't want this. How
Yeah.
can we ever make that work? And so, how did you break that logjam? Like I know it's just sort of getting to know each other better, but how did it actually shift things then?
But there was another really key point, and this could only have happened in this century because it would not have happened in the last century. But at a certain point, I think we've been working with Lene, the couples counselor, for 9 months, maybe a year. And at a certain point, Lene said, "It seems to me that the two of you are together. It seems to me that the two of you are actually pretty in love and devoted to each other. Have you ever thought about having an open arrangement?" And we were both
Uh,
shocked because I thought that was a dirty word. I thought
mm,
professional licensed therapists were not supposed to say that word. That wasn't how
huh,
I was trained because I'm a therapist too, and it was really taboo to mention non-monogamy as a couples therapist. But Lene was very matter of fact about it. She said, "You know what? I have other clients that are in open arrangements and they make it work. Yeah, it's complicated, it's challenging, there's not the same social support, but if you want to make it happen, you can choose to make it happen. It's your marriage, it's not somebody else's marriage." And that was super powerful for us to have a professional say they can work if you want them to work.
yeah, right.
And so we were like stunned for about a week and didn't talk about it. And then at a certain point, I said, could we? I offered to my spouse. I said, like, could we go down this path as an experiment? Could we try it for a period of time? And if it doesn't work, and if you decide you want a more conventional arrangement with another guy, I'm like a big, I'm not like protective of money or anything like that. I'll give you a super easy divorce. Like we'll make this so easy on you, but we'll at least know that we tried everything to
Hmm,
see if we could make something work.
uh-huh.
And it ended up actually. So we did. We started the experiment. We called it the experiment. We started the experiment, and it ended up being good for both of us. It meant that we were inviting other people into our lives who actually helped us grow and understand ourselves in different ways. Like I actually think that the men she saw were good for her. Not only good for her, they
Huh.
were good for me.
Ah.
Um, yeah, because I ended up having relationships with them too. Not deep relationships or anything like that, but I always met them. Just like
Oh, interesting.
anybody I was going out with, she met.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so yeah, we
Cool.
tried to keep tabs on each other that way.
That's cool. That's interesting, and it also speaks to just like you can do this any way you want. You can do it where you meet each other's partners, or you
Yeah,
can do it where you know nothing about the other's partners, or like, and in my case, like I don't necessarily meet all my wife's partners, although I have sometimes.
yeah,
But like we talk about it, and I learn stuff about my wife and about myself from talking to her about other relationships, and it helps
right,
strengthen what we have just because of the information. It's just good
yeah,
information to know.
yeah. I was so threatened. I was surprised actually by how really discombobulated I was when my spouse started dating other men. It brought up so many issues about my own inadequacy and
Mm.
my own insecurities as a male person and stuff like that. And this first guy that she dated was an extraordinary soul, and he would send back gifts to me. Um, he once he sent a jacket or a scarf, or once he gave us tickets to the theater. Like, he did all these things to kind of neutralize any sense of threat I must have felt. Like, I would like think I really should not like this guy. I really should be more jealous or hostile towards him. But then he would send
Uh-huh.
home a piece of clothing, and I was like, oh, but I like that. I do like that shirt though.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and so, like, it just we just met a lot of very big-hearted, generous people along the
Yeah.
path to
Huh.
doing this.
Interesting. That's so cool. I'm curious because this is something like so many men in this situation struggle with is like they know what they want and that they can see the vision of an open marriage working and they want to stay with their wives, but also not have to shut down this other side of themselves, especially for bi men. And the impasse often is like, their wives just say no and they've never wanted an open relationship and they can't imagine it and it's like an ultimatum. It's like if that's what you want then we're not going to be married. And it sounds like that's sort of where your wife started,
Yes.
and maybe when you got into the relationship with AIDS happening, like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then even later, like you just haven't ever seen that vision for your life, so it's hard to imagine, and it's easy to just say no, and society backs you up in just saying no, I don't want that. How did I'm not interviewing her, so it's not, we won't go too deep into her mind, but how do you think she was able to see that possibility, and how did you work that out between you?
Well, I can say the stuff that's in the book, and then she also like kind of approved me to say a couple other bullet points about her perspective, because I've been asked a couple times
Yeah.
like, what did she think about this, or how did she do that?
Uh-huh.
Um, I would say that she in the memoir she goes down this path quite ambivalently. It is a very threatening path for anyone to go down, but I think, especially, I think for many women, I think part of female socialization is to feel more threat and betrayal by marriage being done in less than a kind of conventional way. I
Mhm.
think I'm okay saying that. And so it was really threatening. She was ambivalent, and that persisted for a lot of the experiment. That
Mm.
she still struggled, but it was kind of balanced out by. But yeah, I do actually really love this guy,
Mm.
and he is a good dad. And I was always clear in my head, like, I actually am not pursuing a long-term exclusive romantic partnership with a guy or with anybody else. I actually am really
Yeah.
I have always wanted to be primarily with her. And we set up a lot of agreements. Every non-monogamous couple, because it's not handed to you, what the container looks like. You have to come up with agreements about how you're going to do it. And we were really protective of our partnership.
Yeah.
We did not bring any of our partners to the family home unless there was an explicit agreement with the other person that we could do that. But generally, we didn't do that. We kept
Interesting.
we kept our what we were doing in our romantic lives pretty separate from the business of raising our kids and living under the same roof. And I think that really helped us. We kind of it built in a kind of protection that made it easier when it was scary. It was scary
Yeah.
for both of us, though.
I Tell me a little more about what was scary, and also like the question that came up for me is how did you handle her ambivalence about it? Because yeah, I mean, I'm guessing you got to a point where she's less ambivalent about it, and although I don't know because I haven't finished the book, but how did you navigate that and stay true to what you were looking for while with her ambivalence there?
Yeah, I was, as I said, I was raised by a really strong mother, and I had a very close relationship with her. And I was like intent from a very early age. I wanted to be the best little boy in the world, right? And then, when I was a boyfriend, I wanted to be the best boyfriend in the world. And then when I was husband to my spouse, I wanted to be the best husband in the world, right? I had this perfectionistic way, like I never wanted to do anything wrong. And part of what I had to let go of is, okay, I am not going to be the best husband in the world. Like, I am not going to be the perfect husband here. There are going to be times where she's unhappy or uneasy with things that I'm doing. but we still have a basic understanding that we're committed to each other. And I'm just
Yeah.
going to tolerate that this is a time in our marriage where maybe she's uneasy or unhappy or anything. Like it was in the early stages when either one of us would go out, it would be hard for whoever stayed home with the kids because you just would feel this left out feeling. Even though your rational mind, you're like, I said he could go out or I said she could go out, it's fine. But like on a visceral level, you're like, why am I home
Right.
watching Bear in the Big Blue House with the kids again?
Right.
Um,
Right.
I would like to be out having fun too. So, but that dissipated over time, especially as we came to see that we both got a lot of benefit and growth from the people we were meeting. We
Yeah.
were both
Mm,
changing in healthy and meaningful ways, not just me, right?
right.
She actually found things by being with other men too.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so I think we and as time passed, neither one of us we kept showing up for each other. Neither one of us was going anywhere. And so after a certain point of time, it feels odd to say, to be fearful that she or he is going to go away because he hasn't so far, like,
Right.
I mean, now
Interesting.
we've been together for over 30 years now.
Wow. Wow.
So
So it's even more time since this
yeah, I
moment.
mean, this started in 2007. So,
Wow.
it's been a while.
Cool. Wow. So we'll have to wrap up in a minute and then I'll stick around and we'll get into it a little more. But just to wrap up here, like where are things now and what have I love that you've learned things and both of you have learned things from the relationships you've had. And it sounds like it's benefited both of you. Like just to sort of take us to the present, like yeah, where are you now? What have you enjoyed about this journey? And also I guess maybe if you want to get to this, like what advice do you have for other people who are navigating something like this?
Yeah. Interestingly, when our last kid moved out of the house, a lot of people we found expected that this would be where my spouse and I would part ways.
Mm,
And it was so odd to us. We kept hearing that from people, like, "Well, now you guys can you can leave each other easily." I'm like, "Wait a minute, we haven't done all this work
yeah.
to feel solid in our bond to just leave each other." The reason we stayed together was that we always enjoyed each other. We enjoyed each other even during times
Right.
we were angry at each other. And
Yeah,
so,
you figured out how to make it work
yeah,
in a better way. Why leave it now?
yeah, no, I mean, in a lot of ways too, for me at least, it took a lot of pressure off the primary relationship. Like many couples deal with like discrepant levels of sexual desire and frequency of sexual wanting and things like that. And I don't really have to deal with that. I don't really have to deal. It's nice to not have that pressure on my primary bond. We still live in the same house together. We both enjoy keeping the house. We are always planning our next vacation, always planning the next visit with our children. It's a very nice stage of life to have a lot of free time,
Yeah.
um, and to be able to do more things than we could when we were raising kids. And
Yeah.
also, I will say we both miss our kids desperately. So,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
and they,
And yeah, go ahead.
oh, I just you said something about advice,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and I don't. I think the book is a story, and the story may have some ideas for people about how they can be patient with the process of finding themselves within a marriage and how they can reimagine and reinvent marriage, even though we get a lot of supplied stories about what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
So I hope like it gives people the courage to make their own marriages, to make the marriages that are going to fit for them, and maybe give them courage to defy social conventions and expectations and judgments.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Beautiful. Yeah, that's the truth about like that's what queerness taught me is like there are all these rules we think about, but actually you don't have to abide by most of those rules. They're norms that and many of them are not actually benefiting most of us. They exist for
yeah,
certain reasons and you can write the rules of your relationship between whoever
yeah.
whoever's in it gets to write it and create it however you want and
Yeah,
it's
marriage. The
beautiful.
reasons for why people marry, why marriage looks the way it does, in the conventional sense, they're ancient. They
Yeah.
go back to an
Yeah.
era where love wasn't even part of the of the mix.
Yeah.
So
Right.
so it's okay to update it.
Right.
I
There are
I
so many things that are possible now that certainly weren't possible 100 years ago, but weren't even possible 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so why not explore the possibilities? Why live by the rules that were written so long ago? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Last question. What's the story that you tell now? Are you on the same page about what sort of happened, and what's the narrative in a short form?
I can't say what the story that she would write would be. I don't. I mean,
Okay.
I don't fully know. I know that I run everything I write about us by her. So she should not be surprised by anything I write about her, because she either reads it or I talk to her about it.
Hmm.
So yeah. So the common story. I think the common story is a lot of the common story is what is in the maps they gave us.
Uh,
That's kind of what I hope the achievement was, at least from my end. But definitely, if she
cool.
had been writing it, there was another book about marriage that came out like within the last year by Harrison Scott Key, How to Save Your Marriage, and it's about a marriage in the aftermath of infidelity. And his wife actually contributes a chapter to it, which I was really impressed by. I was like, that's a really interesting idea. You go through the whole
Mm.
7 chapters of the guy's story, and then you get one chapter of what she thought about it. But that's not what
Interesting.
we had. That's not what we
Yeah.
had.
Interesting. Cool. Well, everyone should read the book. I'm really enjoying it so far and plan to continue. Tell people when it comes out, where they can find it, where they can find your stuff, your
Yeah.
website and work in general.
The book is out. The book should be in
Oh, cool.
bookstores near folks. You can order it from Black Lawrence Press, which is the small independent press. And it's always great to patronize small independent presses. They're the little guys in the big struggle. You can go to my website too, which is waynescottwrites.com. And then you can also see, like, that's got the modern love essay and the podcast and all the other things I've written in this area. So yeah.
Cool.
And I would
Awesome.
be flattered if people did it, if people looked for some of the other stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. All of those links will be in the show notes. You can find them there. Yeah, well, I want you to stick around for Patreon. For if you're subscribed to us on Patreon, we're going to talk a little more I want to hear some more practical details. Actually, that's kind of what I'm interested in, but we'll see where it goes. So patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. If you're not there, you can hear it. Thank you for sticking around. But for those of you leaving us for now, thank you, Wayne, for being here. I'm really glad we connected through your publicist and then realized we had other connections too. I just think there's so many people in this position, and these stories are not often told. That's why I wrote my book, and similar for you, I think, but it's like really a interesting story, and the way you write it so far I'm loving, and it's very open and vulnerable. So thanks for sharing your story, and thanks for coming here.
Thanks for the conversation. This was great.
Thanks for listening to this episode with Wayne. If you want to hear the bonus content, we talked about bottoming. He told some interesting stories about bottoming, and we talked about just other things he's been exploring as part of his open marriage. You won't want to miss that. Check it out, patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. If you subscribe, you also get early access and you get video of every episode. So who knows what I'm wearing in this video right now? You only know if you're on Patreon. Cool. That's it. Bye. Thanks for listening. Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy is produced and edited by me, Robert Brooks Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our new logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Minzer. To help support this podcast, visit patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. You'll get full video episodes, early access, and bonus content. Visit robertbrookscohen.com to learn more about my coaching, my book, and my stand-up comedy. And thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy.